Hello, Griffins. I hope you're having a great day. Looks like a pretty nice day outside today. A little chilly out there, though, so it's sunny, though. That's encouraging. Looking to try and get out there and do some fishing again. Went the other day, and so hot I didn't catch a thing. It was brutal. But thankfully I didn't get sunburned. Put my sunblock on this go around, so didn't get myself sunburned. Let's jump in and check out. Again, I went through the rest of the year instructions on the video yesterday, and went through about the first half of these notes. So I'm going to try and cruise through the last half of them, or just go and go and go until I can't go any further, till I tap out. So yeah, if you're confused about these directions, you could always email me. If the worksheets are acting funky and not opening right, you could email me. Watch the 3 videos. That should pretty well catch you up to, right before the Obama years. So get you up through the mid-2000s of American history, which is about as recent as we can go, while still maintaining that omniscient, viewpoint of a historian. Let's jump into the notes. What a collage. Good stuff. All right, if the notes are acting weird, I'd encourage you to open them in Google Slides and see if that fixes it. But if it's still acting weird, email me and I'll just send it to you as an attachment. Hokey dokily. Let's see, where did I leave off last time? Right here, I believe. The last of the Soviet leaders. The last, but I thought Mother Russia would last forever. Well, I'm sorry, children, you thought wrong. The Soviet Union would end in 1991, and Mikhail Gorbachev would be the last of the Soviet leaders. The Iran-Contra affair is probably the biggest stain on the Reagan presidency. It was a very embarrassing situation for President Reagan and the military and the CIA. The U.S., for a period of 2 years, had been secretly selling weapons to Iran, a country that hates us, but we wanted that sweet, sweet money. So we were selling them weapons, and that also violated an international embargo that the United Nations had set up. So we were, secretly violating this international embargo and selling weapons to a country that doesn't even like us. It's going to be hard to convince the American people that was the right decision. When Reagan was caught and the whole scandal was exposed, he claims that we were trading arms for hostages that were being held in Lebanon. That turned out to be a big crock of baloney Jones and was not true at all. We were in fact trading them just straight up for the cash that we were then injecting into Nicaragua. Just dropping boatloads of cash into Nicaragua so that the Contras could fight the Sandinistas, a communist group that had control of government in Nicaragua. So we were selling weapons to Iran and funneling that money over to support a anti-communist revolution in Nicaragua. That's where the money was actually going. And this is the biggest downfall of the Reagan years. He had recovered the economy, but unfortunately, this would convince Americans that maybe he's not telling the whole story here. Maybe the CIA is doing a lot more deceptive underground operations than we really know about, which is true. The main reason we were selling those weapons over to Iran, again, was to fund the Contras, seen here, and their fight against the communist Sandinistas. We wanted to stop communism in Central America. Reagan was much more of an old school containment theory or containment policy guy, that he wanted to contain the spread. And so we were pumping bunches of guns and weapons over to Iran, who were using it to fight a war against Iraq, and taking that money and pumping it back into Nicaragua to fight against communism. The whole scandal was revealed. Reagan came out, then lied about it. Kind of at the center of this whole scandal was Oliver North, who basically gave up all the evidence and said, I've had complete power to do everything that I did. I'm in the CIA. We do covert stuff. That's our job. If you got a problem with it, then, that's too bad, because the CIA does all sorts of covert stuff, and I'm fully authorized to do this covert stuff. So if you don't like it, it's too bad for you. Oliver North admitted to doing a lot of illegal things, and that the government had been doing illegal things, but he was later exonerated by a federal judge. They let him off the hook, but he's kind of the guy that it is believed that he came up with this whole plan and pitched it to the president. Mikhail Gorbachev is going to be the last Soviet leader before the Soviet Union collapses. Their economy was in shambles. Like literally bad times. The economy had failed because they were fighting an unwinnable war in Afghanistan against the Mujahideen. Very similar to our current war in Afghanistan, it went on and on and on. It costs lots of money. A lot of soldiers are dying. So it's not a popular war. They have the same problem that we have with Afghanistan currently. But unlike America, the Soviet economy just couldn't sustain the amount of money they were spending on this war. The economy collapsed. In fact, you can go in and there's a cool YouTube video of a grocery store in the Soviet Union in the 80s. So you can see the shelves are empty here, folks. There's nothing. It sounds really, really loud. The stores are practically empty. The Russian currency was so inflated that your Soviet money was becoming worth less and less. The price of goods was rising, making the problem even worse. You know, you go into your Soviet grocery store and find, you know, where's the meat at? Well, that's not a whole lot to choose from. Times were rough. There's actually a story that Gorbachev came over to visit the United States, and he was in Texas, and when they landed, they took him into an American grocery store, and he was so stunned by the, like, everything's in here. You can buy avocados, you can buy, there's everything available in here. There's so much fresh produce and meat, and Gorbachev was just stunned by it so much that he thought the grocery store had been set up and rigged to make America look cool. But then they went around the corner, and there was another grocery store just like it with the same stuff. So he said secretly that's when he knew that communism had failed the Russian people and knew that he was going to have to reform the government into a capitalist democracy like the United States. So the Soviets say, if you can't beat them, hey, let's join them. The government gives the businesses back to people and allows private ownership of businesses again. So private individuals can own a company and make money from it and direct the business as they see fit, rather than the government doing it all as they had previously been doing, because that's communism, is collective government ownership. The government agrees that they're going to be more transparent. They need to be more open about what's going on here, and that basically the writing was on the wall and they were going to reorganize the government. In 1987, Ronald Reagan, Berlin Wall was torn down in 1989, I believe. He gives the speech in 1987 saying, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And the Soviets complied. They later tear the wall down, you know, just indicating that, you know, the Iron Curtain had fell, the Cold War was ending, and it was ending real, you know, really quickly over a period of a couple years. So that's not really that quickly, I guess. The fall of the Berlin Wall, seen here, famous photograph. They tear the wall down. If you go over to Germany and visit, you can still, you know, buy little chunks of the Berlin Wall as kind of a cool little touristy keepsake. So the Berlin Wall no longer exists. It's torn down there at the end of the 80s. Gorbachev's key to ending the Cold War and setting it up so that Russia and the United States could be friends again. So with the sinking Soviet ship, all of the Eastern European countries that had been under Soviet domination were going to be released to do their own thing again, and they mostly all form capitalist democracies as well. He's the man of the year, Gorbachev is. So he's the mastermind behind fixing Russia, getting them back on their feet, and the main goal was to get rid of communism and reorganize the country. The Cold War ends, so that means that Eastern Europe's going to be free again. Yay, freedom. These countries again form capitalist democracies. The Berlin Wall's demolished in 1989. The Soviet Union completely dissolves in 1991, and they write a new constitution that sets their government as a democratic sort of system. Now, the main problem is that Vladimir Putin's been the de facto leader of Russia since the late 90s, indicating maybe the Russian people don't have as much democracy as they'd like. There's not a lot of freedom of choice when only one guy is running. So there's also concerns about him rigging the election when people are running against him. The Velvet Revolution over in Prague, yeah, the Czech Republic, was super happy to get rid of the Soviet domination in their country and do their own thing. The same with the rest of Eastern Europe, and even Yugoslavia disintegrates into a bunch of different countries. That's going to be a problem, called the Yugoslav Wars. But we'll deal with that later. So yes, in a period of about 2 years here, all of Eastern Europe becomes free again. East Germany is going to be released in 1990, and West Germany and East Germany unite back together to form a single Germany. Science and technology in the 80s. NASA kind of has a big problem. There's a disaster that's broadcast on live TV. The Space Shuttle Challenger explodes. And what made this even worse was that it was broadcast on live TV, and one of the crew members was a school teacher. NASA put out a challenge saying, let's put a school teacher on a rocket into space, and that'll be super cool and encourage kids to study science. So pretty much every school in America had their TVs on for the little chitlins to watch as the space shuttle exploded. Basically a minute after it took off, it exploded, killing all of the crew. It was terrible. One of those situations where people remember where they were, and a lot of people unfortunately remember that they were at school watching it with their teacher, because NASA, basically put it out there that this is an education experience here. We're going to put a teacher on the shuttle. Christina McCaulfield, I believe is her name. McAuliffe. Krista McAuliffe. Wow, I botched Christina McCaulfield. Who the heck is that? Krista McAuliffe. Pardon me. She was the teacher that was selected to go on this, ill-fated journey. Personal computers become more accessible and more affordable. So this is going to be in the 80s, businesses start incorporating computers into their business. People's homes, people are going to start buying personal computers to have at their house to use. But the internet's not really going to blow up and be a big thing until later on. CDs, VCRs, video game consoles become mainstays of American households. So consumer spending is way up in the 80s. People are buying all sorts of cool new stuff, just like the Fresh Prince here. Everybody wanted to get their Sony Walkman. That doesn't look like a Walkman. I don't know what that is. Might be a Walkman. Maybe he's just holding it sideways. People want to buy computers. They want to buy that NES and get the Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt games. They want to get their computer so they can, play games and possibly work and do all sorts of things with a computer. MTV, the old days when MTV actually did just play music videos all the time. So it was an iconic channel of the 80s, culturally significant, enough that I would put it in my notes about life in the 1980s. People are buying all sorts of new CDs. Consumer spending is going crazy, and the economy is definitely benefiting from that. The king of pop, Michael Jackson. He's an iconic musician of the 80s. One of the most commercially successful artists of all time, in fact. Madonna, same deal. Very popular artist in the 80s. Also a pop musician, much like Michael Jackson. So they were selling lots of records because the economy was good. People had jobs again and were willing to spend money on consumer goods. The days of hair metal and just regular metal and just rock and roll, that's, you can't talk about life in the 80s without taking a little time to mention, look at this hair. What is going on with this hair? How much hairspray do these guys really need to use? Probably put a hole in the ozone layer for each one of these goofy looking goobers. Here's Van Halen. They're not really a hair metal band, but you can see they got a little hair going, a little bit of flow, little little salad coming off the top here. Twisted Sister, yeah, kind of a different look there. Guns N' Roses, we're talking. That's a whole lot of salad right there, whole lot of flow. So these are just popular musicians from the 80s. 80s fashion. Look at this glorious, glorious mullet. What is going on with that? So yes, the mullet's in. Fluorescent sort of neon colors are in. The windbreaker is in. Leather jackets are in, as is the jean jacket, but the denim jacket look is more of a late 80s and truly more of a 90s fashion thing. But jean jackets were around. Here's Princess Diana, some more of a formal look here. You can see it's big hair everywhere. Reagan is going to serve out his 2 terms. His main controversy, the Iran-Contra affair, kind of stains his legacy a little bit, but otherwise was a very successful president. Some of his policies maybe didn't work the best in the long run, like trickle-down economics has not really proven to be that successful in the United States, but they at least, albeit, were somewhat working in the 80s as a short-term solution. Vice President George H.W. Bush is going to easily defeat Michael Dukakis in the 1988 election. So Reagan's vice president, his friend, and ultimately his successor is the next president. Bush promises to basically be Reagan light. He says, I'll continue Reagan's policies, not going to rock the boat here. The economy's cooling, but we're going to stick with the trickle-down economics, and things work out just fine. I'll be Ronald Reagan Jr., basically. So Bush runs a campaign saying, vote for me. If you liked Ronald Reagan, vote for me. And that turns out to be a whole lot of people. Wins 53% of the vote. Michael Dukakis, the ultimate downfall of his campaign was he decided that he wanted to go ride in a tank at a political event so that he would look, confident, presidential, like a good commander-in-chief. But instead, people looked at it and they were like, look at this nerd. What's this guy trying to prove? Riding around with this helmet on that has his name on it, like he's ever served in the military. This is ridiculous. So it ended up actually backfiring and not boosting his popularity, but instead convincing Americans that he's just a huge nerd trying to con them and fool them into thinking that he knows what he's doing here. So George H.W. Bush, the first of the Bush presidents, his son, George W. Bush, later becomes president, and then Jeb Bush recently tried to run for president in 2016, but didn't get very far. The Bush years. Bush is going to have a couple different international conflicts to deal with. Down in Panama, there's a guy that's refusing to step down. Manuel Noriega is not stepping down. He lost an election, but is like, I don't care about you guys' vote. I'm going to stick around and continue running this thing. So if you got a problem with it, that's too bad. George H.W. Bush, Papa Bush, the elder Bush, he says, you can't do that. That's not how democracy works, buddy. Maybe we should bring the military down there and remind you how democracy works. U.S. servicemen stationed at the Panama Canal were also going to be put at risk by this fighting between Noriega and his political opponents. The people who won the election said, we're supposed to be running this thing, Noriega. What are you doing, dude? Operation Just Cause was the military invasion of Panama. We invade them. We capture Noriega. He's convicted of racketeering and drug trafficking charges, as well as just being a sorry loser. Here is Noriega, seen here. The invasion was very quick. The war lasted a month, essentially. And we got the job done. Noriega was captured. We bring him back to Florida. We try him, and we put him in jail. Or we put him in prison. So Bush was seen as kind of a skilled commander-in-chief here, that he could handle an international crisis quickly. The second big international crisis of his presidency is the Gulf War. Saddam Hussein is a totalitarian dictator. He's not fascist or communist, but he's bad. He is going to take his Iraqi army and invade Kuwait in 1990. We don't like that because Kuwait has lots of oil that they trade to us on pretty fair prices. We don't care for this invasion of Kuwait. Neither does really the rest of Europe or the other, the international community. We wanted to be able to trade with Kuwait. And if Saddam Hussein takes Kuwait over, he could jack the oil prices up, screw us all over, hurt our economies. We don't want that. So we put together an international group through the United Nations. So this is going to be a multinational coalition of forces to go fight and liberate Kuwait from Saddam Hussein. We also feared that if Hussein captures Kuwait, what's next? Is he going to go after Israel or Saudi Arabia? We can't let our friends be vulnerable to this totalitarian jerk. So we put together this coalition. Let's take a look at this coalition and see just exactly who was with us. I know you can always count on our good friends, the Brits, to help us out. Kuwait's obviously, that's the side we were fighting on. Iraq's by itself. Saudi Arabia helps us out. Thanks, Saudis. Egypt helps us out. France helps us out. Thanks, France. And let's see. Can't forget about our neighbors to the north, always there to help us for a just cause. And I believe you don't want to forget about the Aussies either. The Aussies and the Kiwis, they're always there for us as well. So thanks for joining, guys. Looks like even these freshly liberated Eastern European countries jump in. Poland, they had just became a country like right before this started. They decide to jump in. Thanks, Poland, for stepping up to the plate. And, you're basically your first year as a country without the Soviets running you. Our buddies South Korea steps in. Thanks, South Korea. So it's a multinational coalition that goes in to help Kuwait and kick the Iraqis out, which we do. We defeat them pretty quickly, and we decide, let's just leave Saddam Hussein in power. We've done enough here. We kicked him out of Kuwait, and the Iraqi army's destroyed. We don't really need to invade Iraq and go after Saddam Hussein. That's ultimately going to be a mistake because Saddam Hussein's a totalitarian dictator. We will end up going back to Iraq for weapons of mass destruction in 2003 under Papa Bush's son, George W. Bush. This Bush, the second Bush president, his son. So, we've had two Bush presidents and both fought Iraq, basically. There was the Persian Gulf War, the original run, and then the war to get Saddam Hussein out of power and find the weapons of mass destruction, which we never find, the most recent Iraq War. Hussein attacks Kuwait. Again, we don't like that because there's a lot of oil in Kuwait, and they were trading it to us on a pretty good deal, so we don't care for that. It also puts our ally, Saudi Arabia, at risk, who, again, has lots of oil that we trade for. The generals are Norman Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell, who has a very successful political career following his, the plans he put together for the Persian Gulf War. We acted very quickly. We utilized our technological advantage over the Iraqi army. They, unlike the Viet Cong or the Mujahideen or terrorists in the Middle East, they didn't fight with tricky tactics or hit-and-run stuff or hide out and blend in with civilians. They were a formal army that would fight in pitched battles against us, basically both armies line up and start shooting at each other. So we very quickly, just a few months, managed to repel the Iraqis out of Iraq. Here's George H.W. Bush congratulating troops on Thanksgiving. So he was seen as a good commander-in-chief. He got stuff done quickly when it needed to get done. The aftermath of the Persian Gulf War, though, is something that Bush doesn't get done that he wants to. After the success in Kuwait, he asked Congress, let's just invade Iraq and get rid of Saddam Hussein. Then we'll never have to deal with Saddam Hussein screwing with us or upsetting the balance of power in the Middle East ever again. Why not just go in and get rid of him? Congress says, that sounds expensive. No, we don't want to invade Iraq. Kicking them out of Kuwait was enough. The UN Security Council also steps in and says, no, don't do that, George Bush. Don't do that. You don't get to do that. So he's denied by both the UN and Congress from pursuing Saddam Hussein, something that his son would later do as president. Hussein stays in power and begins gassing his own people. So maybe Bush was right. Maybe we should have taken care of this problem back in the original Gulf War, rather than continuing to let this totalitarian dictator do bad things to his people. Like gassing whole villages full of Kurds. He didn't like the Kurdish people who lived in the northern part of Iraq, and openly he just started a genocide against them. Just released sarin gas just in these villages, killed, thousands of people. The H.W. Bush years, well, China decides, you know what, communism's, it's okay for politics, but it's not working for our economics. We want to make some money here. And so China under Deng Xiaoping becomes capitalist economically speaking. They do not become a democracy, though. They don't. There's only one political party there, so it doesn't matter who you vote for. There's only one choice. The Communist Party is the only political party that exists in China. So they are still communist, but their economy is not. Their economy is capitalist. They are only communist, a single-party dictatorship in political structure only. The U.S. forms the NAFTA agreement with Canada and Mexico. We see that as like the European Union's kind of forming trade agreements and just being formed as a thing. We realize, why not work together with our immediate neighbors and form our own sort of economic group that could be the powerhouse of the Western Hemisphere. So, we formed trade agreements, and we're looking to do this largely because the Chinese economy starts growing very, very rapidly, to where we're like, oh, China might actually have the best economy in the world now that they're playing the capitalist game. So we formed this trade agreement partly because we're like, well, if we team up with Canada and Mexico, together the three of us can, stay on top and have a better economy than China, not let them take too much of the market share away from us. So see in red, China is, according to this graph, set to overtake the entire Euro area economy in 2018. So yeah, just China as one country has a bigger economy than all of Europe together. Here's Deng Xiaoping. He's the guy that basically makes China's economy capitalist. Here's George H.W. Bush over in China with Deng Xiaoping. There are some protests in China, though. They don't want to open up to democracy, and the people are kind of mad. They're like, why don't we just become like America? Let's have a democracy where we vote. And there's protests at Tiananmen Square in the late 80s. Photographed here is Tank Man. He's a guy that bravely stood in front of this line of tanks saying, no, you don't get to go. So he was protesting the fact that the communist government crushed the riots by using the military. They send the military in, kill a ton of civilians. It's brutal, brutal stuff. The 1989 Tiananmen Square protests. Let's take a look and maybe see if we can get a death count. No precise figures exist because, the Chinese government won't tell you how many people died. We got other estimates. Around 2,700 people were killed because they were protesting the Chinese government. It still happens in China today. They're an evil political, disease that's basically screwing the whole world over with how they responded to COVID. And thanks for that, China. Thanks for screwing up our school year. And they were like assassinating the journalists who were trying to talk about COVID, and they still don't like people talking about Tiananmen Square, the protests there. Just something's got to be done there, but how can you do it when there's such a massive economic, part of the global economy? So here's NAFTA. Here's how the deal works out. We send mostly agricultural products to our neighbors because farming's great in America. They send back products that maybe don't grow as well here, like, avocados, types of fruits and vegetables. Canada, the big deal with Canada being in NAFTA is they ship us a lot of oil. Oil is the biggest export of the Canadian government. It's not maple syrup or hockey sticks. It's oil from out in Alberta. That's why they call the Edmonton hockey team the Edmonton Oilers. The more you know. There's lots of oil out there in Western Canada, and they are shipping a lot of it down to America on a really, really good deal. Really, really good deal for us. But, lately the deal's not looking as sweet. As the United States is now producing a lot of our own oil, we need less of the Canadian oil. That's why Donald Trump was trying to deal with NAFTA and fix it or get out of it entirely. It's one of his political promises. The 1992 election, George H.W. Bush has 4 years as president. There's 2 wars that we win. He was pretty popular, but the economy was continuing to slow. And it was looking like he was not going to change things up. He was going to continue Reaganomics in the hope that the economy would just recover magically. Bill Clinton is going to campaign on balancing the federal budget, getting off NAFTA, and also gun control, universal health care. He campaigns on a lot of stuff, but this election's unique in that there's a third-party candidate who runs a very successful campaign. H. Ross Perot is a billionaire. He buys tons of TV ads and basically runs for the presidency on the television. In fact, I think he bought a Super Bowl ad where he campaigned for the presidency in the Super Bowl ad. He spends tons of money, much like Bloomberg, in an effort to get people to vote for him, except unlike Bloomberg, Ross Perot is actually popular and got a lot of votes. Let's go to the map here. You can see Ross Perot gets nearly 20% of the popular vote. Almost 20 million Americans voted for him. The problem with Ross Perot running in this election is he's basically running an identical campaign to George H.W. Bush. They want the same things to happen, so the Republican vote is split between these two guys. H.W. Bush probably would have won this election if Ross Perot had never ran. He instead did run and took a lot of votes from H.W. Bush, leaving Clinton as the sole, all the Democratic voters were unified to vote for Clinton, whereas the Republican voters were not unified and were split between these two guys. Clinton wins the electoral majority. He's also really, the last Democratic candidate recently to carry a good chunk of the South. It's because he himself was a Southerner from Arkansas. The Clinton years. Let's see, we're getting pretty close. I might cut it and do the rest of this in another video. So, cool. Jumping back over to Classroom. Again, if you needed directions, I did that in the video for Monday. If you have problems with the worksheet, then just email me and let me know. Have a fantastic day. Peace out. Miss you guys. And hopefully the end of the year isn't stressing you out too much.